Hi, this is Kenneth. Thanks for checking out my workshop video. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I created this cover illustration for ImagineFX. It's quite a long video, it's about 3.5 hours long, so apologies for that. I did speed it up, I had to speed it up about 6 times, so it might be a bit fast to see what's going on, but hopefully I can talk to you about my process and hopefully that will help you understand what's going on screen. I won't be talking all the way through, but I'll be talking intermittently throughout. I recommend just skipping to bits that are interesting to you personally. My process is not complicated, it's pretty simple, and I only used a few brushes throughout this painting. So the default kind of Photoshop brushes I used were the pastel medium tip, which is found in dry media brushes, which I use for a lot of blocking in the background and a few details. I also use a soft round brush, mainly for blending and softening forms, and a bit of shadow stuff. Most of this painting was done with a brush made by illustrator Kyle T. Webster. It's called Chunky Charcoal. I got it from his brush website, kylebrush.com. I recommend checking his brushes out, they're really good. But I use that brush for the majority of my work just now. I just fell in love with it, I love it. Also, you'll see in the video, I create 3 very simple custom grass brushes. I wanted to keep the brushes I use kind of in my style, so that's why I created my own. They're not complicated, I could have spent hours making them more elaborate, but I just created some really simple that I could lay down and create a fast bit of texture to paint on top of. So before we begin, I just wanted to give a quick bit of context to this image. ImagineFX asked me to do the cover for the animation issue, and they provided the idea to me of this girl lying on the grass with her sketchbook, maybe daydreaming or something, maybe with a pet of some kind. So that was kind of the brief, and I took that and I went from there. So you can see here I've laid out some kind of rough ImagineFX cover reference, and I'm going to use that to draw on top of. I find it easier to think about my composition when I can see the kind of context it's going to be in. In this case, it's the cover of the magazine, so I want to be able to see an indication of that cover as I'm drawing these thumbnail sketches. It will really kind of dictate where the character is going to be lying and the elements around her. At this point, I'm doing really rough drawings, nothing complex at the moment. I'm trying to find the idea, or find the pose, and find the overall character, situation, composition. So I'm not spending time on the details. I'm drawing quite zoomed out, and I'm just thinking about the overall image. And another thing is I'm going for variety here. I want each character, each thumbnail to be very different. So for example, the poses are all quite different from each other. I see this first thumbnail is the girl's kind of resting on a large dragon or some kind of creature behind her. The third one, she's obviously stretching out, a bit more of a dynamic pose. The middle one, a bit more pensive, kind of relaxed. As long as they're all different from each other, that's what's important. At this stage in the process, you want to give variety to the art director, so they've got some choices about how to take things forward. So for this final thumbnail, I'm roughing out this girl kind of arm in the sky with the pencil in her hand trying to draw something that's creating this shadow over her. I was kind of trying to create a bit of a story in each one, in each of these thumbnails. I think the first one and the last one had the most story there. So for this one, she's drawing the thing in the sky on her sketchpad, and I wanted to tie it in some way. I hadn't quite worked out what she was drawing or why she was drawing it, but I liked the idea of the character on the cover drawing, which is something everyone that reads the magazine is interested in. So once I have my really rough thumbnails, I I lighten the color of the line and I draw on top. So what I'm doing now is I'm clarifying that drawing. I would never send those first roughs to an art director or a client. I don't think they're not clear enough to show the idea. So I draw on top with a more clear and coherent image, and I'm also figuring out the poses a bit better, and I'm working a bit in the details, but just enough to sell the idea, not wanting to get too involved in the details of the drawing, just enough so we know everything is on screen. So my idea for a kind of narrative in this image was the girl's drawn something on her sketch pad. So she's drawn a kind of a dragon or something, and it's either in her imagination, it's there with her and she's resting on it, or it really has come to life, something like that. I wanted to try and get a bit of story in the image. I think it's important. I mean, illustration is about storytelling, and especially in animation, character design. It's all about story. That's really important. I think the middle two thumbnails I did, there wasn't much story there. I offered them as a variety of pose, but I think the first thumbnail and the fourth thumbnail had a bit of narrative, which made them stronger ideas. I'm adding a bit of value here. You don't necessarily need to for a rough thumbnail sketch, but I like to do it. It kind of brings the thing to life and gives an idea of the environment and the lighting, which can be important to try and sell an idea. Again, I'm just tightening up these rough drawings. I think I was trying to focus on the character. So each one's I kind of got a different attitude. The first two, similar attitude, but I wanted each one to have something going on. So this girl's obviously, she's got a pencil to her chin. She's thinking about something. I wanted the personality to shine through. So I did this pose because I wanted something a bit more energetic, a bit different to the others. Not necessarily the strongest idea, but for me, the variety of energy in each pose was important. And I also added a little dog here. I also had a dog in number 4, I think. And the dog obviously made it to the final illustration. Also, the girl's hair is different. I've tried to make her a different person altogether, different clothing. It's all about variety at this stage. Trying to give options to the art director and give a choice that we can kind of hone in on for the final kind of image. So now I'm just adding a value past to each of these images, like I did with the first one, just to clarify the image. The value helps sell the idea a bit. And also because the shadow is going to be quite important, I think, for this, at least in the fourth one, the shadow is going to be important to the little story that's going on. And I think the shadows are going to sell the idea of it being a bright sunny day. So that value can really help give the art director an idea of what I'm trying to say with each image. So by this point, I think I'm pretty much done with these thumbnails, just tweaking a few bits and pieces. And what I do is I copy them all and I shift them below and I keep the top ones with the ImagineFX copy on it and the bottom ones without, just so it's clear for the art director to see. And I just paint out some of that ImagineFX logo. And this is the image that was eventually chosen, the thumbnail image that was chosen to move forward with. I think it was a good choice. It's got a bit of a narrative in there. It's still dynamic. There's a fun character, and I think the pose works well with the composition of the cover and stuff. So here I'm doing a really quick perspective grid, and I just distort it and tweak it to give me an idea of the ground plane that these characters are sitting on. Really simple. It just gives me a rough idea, and it helps me draw the pose and the foreshortening a bit more accurately if I have that. Quite often I'll bring either reference images or sketches from a previous stage in the process, and I'll bring them into Photoshop and I'll do the split screen thing. So you can actually have two canvases in Photoshop at the same time, kind of side by side. Obviously, if you've got a dual monitor system, you can use that. I do have that, but for the purposes of this process, I did this, and I do it quite often anyway. It's really handy seeing right next to your canvas some reference. You'll notice that I've actually been drawing over the ImagineFX logo throughout this thumbnailing process, and that's deliberate. I was told that some of the drawing, some of the illustration can actually go on top of this ImagineFX logo. So it's not an accident. And you've probably seen ImagineFX covers before. It happens quite a lot where the illustration is part of it's behind the text, while some of it can break out in front. So right now you see me drawing these kind of pink lines and arrows, and what I'm doing here is I'm thinking about the lines of action in the scene and the way the eye is being led and the way I want the eye to be led. So I use these kind of pink arrows on a separate layer just as a reference for myself to try and build the composition around the flow of these lines, and then I'll switch the layer off once I'm happy that the elements are kind of leading the eye in that way. So you'll see here I flip the canvas horizontally, and what this lets me do is see if the drawing's working from a different point of view. Um, Usually when I do this, the sketch just looks a bit weird, so I have to go in and I tweak it a bit. So those eyes looked a bit funny, the face looked a bit skewed, and flipping the canvas just lets you see things you wouldn't normally see. So I continue drawing, refining the shapes, and I think this is my third pass. So I had the very first rough thumbnail I drew on top with a kind of light brown colour, and now I'm drawing on top again with a darker colour just to try and get the shapes right and fix any problems with anatomy or anything. Probably also noticed me rotating the canvas. So Photoshop has this really cool rotate canvas function. I think Painter has it too. And it's kind of on the fly rotation. Just by pressing R, you can rotate the screen and it lets you draw nice kind of curves or get angles that are difficult to get if you just kept the page set as it was. I use it all the time. It's one of my most used tools in Photoshop. Just a quick thing I want to point out. Throughout this whole process, you'll see me quite often selecting part of an image, and I use the free transform tools, the distort tools, and the warp tools to edit that part of the image without having to redraw it. It's just a really quick way to tweak things. Not always perfect, but sometimes it's all you need, or just to move things around. I haven't mentioned this so far, but in terms of lighting, I'm always thinking about my light source or light sources. So in this image, there's one major light source, which is the sun. You can't see the sun, but obviously it's there. And it's casting these shadows and it's affecting the color and the lights in the scene. So I imagine the sun would be behind the viewer in the sky, to the left of the image, and just a bit lower than the image. And all the shadows must conform to that light source. So I'm continuing the same process as I did for the initial thumbnails. I want to create some variations on this character, just so the art director has a bit of choice again. So I'm probably going to change the clothing, the face, the hair, and the dog position. And I think later on I'll even choose different shadows, the shadow that's looming over her, to try and get different ideas in there. I spent a bit of time on these faces trying to get something I was happy with. I think I was having a bad drawing day. I just couldn't get the face right and the hair. So you'll see me go back and forward and change it, erase it, do it again. I did a slight tilt there of the head just to kind of give the pose a bit of life. I think at this stage, even though these are still technically thumbnail drawings, I'm taking a bit of time to get things right because this is going to set me up for later on when I start painting. So the more I can kind of lock down here, the better really. So I want the shapes to be right, I want the anatomy, the perspective, the foreshortening on that hand. As much as I can nail down here, the better. As you can see, I'm still drawing that face, rubbing it out, trying to get it right. Um, for me, it's part of the process. I don't always get it right first time, and I have to work at it to try and find something I'm happy with. So I've copied the image one last time, third variation. I'm going to do, I change the clothes, give her shorts, I change the top, and I change the face and hair again. Just, again, variety. It's important to show a client variety so they've got options to choose from. In terms of character design, I find in an illustration there's less emphasis on the backstory of this character because you've only got one image to convey everything. So you can get that stuff in there, but in an animated film or a TV show, you have a lot more scope for really developing this character. But in one image, you have to kind of, who is this person? So it's difficult. So for this, I mean, I guess I wanted a character that was kind of engaging to look at from first sight. It's going to be on a magazine cover. So a bit cheeky about her, but kind of full of life, and she's enjoying what she's doing. She's enjoying the process of drawing. That's what I wanted to convey with her. So here I start to address these shadows that are looming over the character, uh, and they're important to try and tell a bit of a story here. So I was struggling with what to make them. The middle one I've gone for some kind of, I guess, an eagle. I guess the eagle is trying to symbolize something, you know, dreams, and this girl might be chasing her artistic dreams and stuff. Don't know if it really worked, but I spent a bit of time just doing this shadow. So committed to the idea. See if the client liked it or not. For the first shadow, I was trying to do something different, so I ended up doing a kind of a dragon silhouette. I wanted the silhouettes to be distinct. Again, it's all about choices at this stage, and trying to nail an idea. So the more variety, the better. I was also trying to clarify this kind of narrative of the girl seeing something in the sky and drawing it on her sketch pad. And it was an animation issue, so I thought, okay, what if she's trying to capture the movement of, you know, a dragon in this instance, or an eagle, and trying to, for animation purposes, try and understand the movement of that animal. That was the idea behind it. I really didn't like the dogs I'd drawn. Did them really quick, mainly as placeholders. So, you know, rubbed them out. I got some reference up, looked through some cute dog photos, and tried to find something that was a bit, you know, a bit more realistic, more grounded in reality. I didn't want it to be so cartoony, but to be honest, the drawings I did before just they weren't very good. So this was my second submission of thumbnails with 3 ideas, variations on the chosen direction from the art director. And they came back to me and they asked me to combine elements from each of these 3 into one image, which is what I'm doing now on screen. So they liked the dog from number 3, but they liked the girl from number 2. And they also asked me to revert to a kind of a monster shadow instead of an eagle or a dragon. So this is what I'm doing here. Just in case you're wondering, so these kind of value overlays and shadow overlays, I'm doing most of these on multiply layers. I use multiply layer quite a lot in my work. It's just a quick way of, if I've got line art, quick way of colouring it. Also I find a quick way of doing some quick shadow stuff, or getting started with a shadow pass. So I sent this and I got some feedback and it was good to go. They wanted to see a colour pass, and this is the start of my colour pass. Now this is a colour rough, this is not the final paint. This is pretty much me figuring out colours in thumbnail form, which I can then send to the art director, say how does this look. If it gets approved, then I can use that colour rough to inform my final painting. Again, most of this will be done on an overlay layer. And you'll see as I've created this hue and saturation layer at the top of my layer panel, and I've turned the saturation down to 0. So when I switch that layer on, the image goes grayscale. And I switch that on and off as I paint, so I can see that these colours that I'm putting down, they have to have a good value structure. So good darks and whites, darks and lights even, which you can't, I find it difficult to see when I'm painting in colour. So I like to switch off the colour information so I can tell if the tones are working right. And you'll see me here, I've switched on the the saturation layer, so it's black and white, and I'm adjusting the colors. I'm creating lights and darks while that layer's switched on and trying to get that value right. But when you switch back to color, it looks really saturated, looks harsh, so then you have to readjust. And I just go back and forward between the grayscale and the color, trying to get that right balance between nice color and good tones, because I really want the girl and the dog to stand out against the background, both in color and also in grayscale. I have to admit, color really doesn't come all that easy to me. I have to really work at it. I've spent years learning how to animate, and then I decided I didn't want to be an animator. So I had to spend years trying to catch up and learn how to paint in color for my illustration work, and I'm still learning. So this process for me is probably the hardest part. Is trying to find a right color scheme, and I basically just paint until I find something kind of looks right. Uh, so I start off, like, at the moment it's really saturated, so I adjust things, I tweak things, I add more colors, I reduce colors, I change colors. I just mess around until it starts kind of coming together. And when I say mess around, I don't mean I'm doing this randomly. I've got some basic knowledge of color theory and, how to light a scene and how colors react and interact with each other. So there's some basic knowledge there. It's more the harmony and bringing everything together into a coherent illustration. For me, that's the tricky part. And I'll talk more about my colour choices as we move on to the painting stage of this. Again, I'm spending a fair bit of time on this colour rough, even though it's just a rough pass, just to show the art director. I'm spending a lot of time because this is going to inform my final painting. So I'm looking at the shadows and I'm putting some blues, try and reflect that off-screen sky that we don't see, but I want to hint is there, or is obviously there. Um, and I'm really trying to finesse things to not too much, but just enough. There's a good solid foundation moving forward. That's really important. And I find a lot of the problem solving and a lot of the work in an illustration is done at the start. I mean, a lot of the work's done later on, but a lot of the actual figuring stuff out is at the start. So I'm getting to the near to the end point of this color rough. I think I've got a kind of good foundation. It's kind of the idea of the colors I want to go for. A lot of green in there because of the grass, obviously, hence the red of the girl's hair and the jacket, and her dark t-shirt so she stands out on top. And I lay these out for the client, for the art director, so they can see, again, what it might look like in context of the magazine. So on the left of the screen here, you can see the feedback from the art director, just some little changes they wanted, mainly about trying to keep the composition so that it's not messing, not interfering with the ImagineFX magazine copy. So I take those notes and I address them. I go in and I change my drawing and basically just tighten things up. I also had to address this sketch on our sketchbook. So we decided to go for a kind of a looming monster. We need the sketch to match the the shadow, the silhouette of that shadow, and we're going for one drawing, just to keep things simple. So this stage is basically me just doing some variations on that sketch. Again, variation is important, show the client, and making those changes that the art director asked me to make. So these were the final 3 rough sketches I sent to the art director, and I think the one on the far right got approved. So once all that's out the way, it's time to start painting. I knew this illustration was going to have a lot of grass in there, and instead of going online and finding some kind of grass brush, I decided to create my own really simple brushes just so I could quickly lay down some texture which was still keeping within my style of painting. Sometimes if you get brushes online, they might be, for example, maybe too realistic looking or not the right kind of style. I want something that really matched how I draw. They didn't have to be really complicated. I could have spent hours trying to make the perfect grass brush, but I just wanted 3 really simple brushes that I could quickly put down some rough texture to kind of really help me progress the painting at the early stages, because I knew I was going to draw on top of this at a later point. So once I was happy with the brushes, it was time to get stuck into the final painting. What I did was I loaded up the approved rough on the left, and on the right you can see me start to paint. I'm painting on a different layer over the top of my rough. I like to keep it there as a reference point. And I'm laying in this kind of orangey red background, and I'm turning the hue jitter on. I'm trying to get a bit of a mixture of colours, but all kind of reddish. And the reason is there's going to be a lot of green in this image, and I wanted the kind of complement of green to kind of shine through. That's a tip I learnt from James Gurney's Colour and Light book. A really good book. I recommend reading it. And I got this advice from there. And you'll see me now, I'm using those brushes I made just to quickly put in some texture, get some feeling of grass in this background. I'll probably paint over most of this, but it's a good starting point for me. And I bring the sketch layer up, put it on multiply, and I separate the characters out onto different layers. And colour as well. I'm going to use the colour from my rough as a kind of underpainting, but I'm painting the background completely from scratch. So using that default chalk Photoshop brush, I'm just laying in some green in the background, carefully not completely painting over that red in the background. I wanted some of that to still shine through. And I put a bit of a hue jitter on there. I don't want it to be all the same green. It has to be a bit of variety in there. Otherwise, it would just be boring to look at. And you might notice me, I'm using that colour rough I did almost like a palette. So I'm colour picking from it, and I'm using it in the final painting. Obviously, I don't want it to be exactly like the rough. I want to bring more life to it, a bit more realism to it. Not too much, because I still want it to be kind of a stylized painting. So here you'll see me start to paint into the characters a bit. I don't really have a set process of how I go about a painting. I just start painting and I try and block everything in. So get everything kind of working together. Do some work on the characters. Get the background colours almost in place. But I do like to kind of start the characters quite quickly if it's a character based piece. Just to kind of, for me, it brings it to life and it kind of gets things going in the right direction. And if they're the most important part of this illustration, so I like to spend a lot of time on them. Although sometimes I get a bit too bogged down in the details of one area at the start when I really shouldn't. I should probably talk a bit about my brush settings while I'm painting. You'll probably see I keep my settings pretty consistent. So my opacity is usually 100%, my flow 100%, but I always put pressure sensitivity on for opacity and line weight. So that's how I like to paint most of the time. Sometimes I'll switch the opacity pressure sensitivity off, usually if I'm blocking in a large area of colour, but for the most part I keep those settings locked. And that's it. I just paint and I use the pressure sensitivity of the tablet to lay down light strokes or not full opacity layers, and I build up colours. That's basically how I work with brushes. One thing I'm really conscious of when I'm painting up a sketch is I don't want to paint out the energy of the sketch. So that's why another reason I like to have it on screen, or I like to refer back to it, because sometimes I lose that energy, dynamism when you start painting out the lines. So I'm really conscious of that because that happens all the time to me. I'll take a nice line drawing, I'll start painting over the top of it, and suddenly I look back to the original line drawing and the painted version is just dead. It's lost the life. So, something to bear in mind. So pretty soon I'd start addressing the shadows these characters are creating, and these shadows are going to be really important, both in setting the kind of setting the character in the scene. So it tells you how close they are to the ground, and the fact that they're kind of leaning back on the grass. And obviously, the shadow also tells us a bright sunny day. So it's important to get these shadows right. You'll see I'm adding a lot of really dark shadow right where the girl is contacting with the ground. And I'm also adding a bit of a bluish green to that, to the kind of top of the shadow there. That's, again, that's the sky, hopefully kind of reflecting in the grass. Maybe a bit exaggerated, but I don't mind. It kind of adds a bit of variety to that shadow, which is nice. So now I start to block in the other elements in the scene. So the girl's kind of jacket, her shoes, the pencils, and the flowers that surround her. So this is still blocking in the colours. They don't have to be fully rendered at the moment. Just need to indicate where they are and make sure everything's working colour wise and value wise. I think it's important to keep switching on this ImagineFX reference just so I know that I'm not painting in areas that are going to either not be seen, or if I paint too much detail in an area and it might take away from the text. So I have to be careful about where I'm placing details, just so it doesn't confuse the image overall. So the art director chose the very first kind of shadow I had in one of my first thumbnail sketches. So I bring that back in and I put it on an overlay layer on top of the other layers. The shadow behind the girl I just painted on a layer, but this monster shadow is gonna be over the top of a lot of other stuff. So to keep things easy to edit, I've kept it on a separate layer on multiply, and I can adjust the opacity, I can paint into it, and it gives me more flexibility that way. I think I might have said a couple of times I've put shadow layers on overlay, and what I meant was I overlay the shadows on a new layer, but I tend to always make the shadow layers a multiply. I might add an overlay layer onto the shadow layer to change the color slightly, but the main shadow layer is usually multiply layer. Is drawing up the most important part of this painting, that pencil. But seriously, it's it's one of the first things you might see because it sticks out and it's on top of the ImagineFX text. So I want it to look nice. But also that hand is going to be really important. So I spend a bit of time later on trying to get that right. So I made the pencil blue, and that was for a couple of reasons. One was it matched the colour of her jeans, it kind of matched the blues, some of the blues in the shadows, but also because it was a bit of a nod to animation. Apparently, in the early days of 2D traditional animation, they used a lot of blue pencils to animate with, and that's why I've done that. I find a quick way to add a bit of form to what you've already drawn is to create a multiply layer and maybe turn the opacity down quite a bit and choose an appropriate color and paint over the top so it creates this kind of shadow as you see I'm doing right now. And I use the soft brush to kind of paint away at that shadow, and I adjust the color so it looks more natural. I just find it a quick way to easily lay down a bit of shadow. I've heard a few artists say when they're doing a character illustration, they kind of work on the eyes and try and get them right quite early on, and I'm no exception. I think it really brings the character to life. So a lot of this stage is just taking all those colors and the rough value that I established in the color sketch and just rendering the details and really finessing the forms. So that's why like I said before, I think it's worth taking the time in those early stages to get a good foundation, because now it's just a matter of taking what's there and I wouldn't say just polishing it up. There's still a lot of work to do, but there's a solid base to progress from. I've started doing a bit more grass in the background, and I really want the grass to kind of lead the eye into the character. So the way I'm laying it down, it kind of the direction of the grass is always towards that character. It's very subtle, but I think it will help the composition. You'll probably notice I've got quite a few layers going on there, and I'm not a big fan of having a ton of layers. I try and keep as few as possible, but when I'm doing a kind of live job, I like to keep things flexible. So I use as many layers as I need to maintain flexibility over the background elements, the characters, so I can move things around easily if I need to, or make the changes that I need to quite quickly. Again, you'll see me jumping in between grayscale and color using that hue saturation layer. And I just keep flipping between them, adjusting the colors of the characters, the shirt, so they stand out against that green background. That's really important. Otherwise, it just won't work as an image. So this is quite a long process. I think this whole illustration took about 20, at least 20 hours to do, from start thumbnails all the way to the finish. A lot of it's just hard work, just sitting down and painting away and making good choices. Well, I made some bad choices, but as long as you make a bad choice and then fix it, to me that's all that matters. But yeah, it's just a lot of painting, so it takes time. It really does. I'm quite impatient actually, so it's tricky for me trying to make myself sit down and finish something. Which is like, maybe that's why my style is quite loose and I don't overly render stuff. So by now you'll see that a lot of the elements of this piece have been blocked in, and I've avoided finishing that foot there, but if I come back to it at some point, I just move around the image, try and do the stuff that I know I can do, get it done, get out of the way, and leave the tricky bits to kind of the end. But as long as overall the image is coming together, that's fine. So right now I'm kind of rendering up these trainers, these shoes, and I guess it's about this point in the process where the details are starting to become more important, and I can't avoid them anymore. Why are feet so hard to draw? I find them really difficult. I've probably not practiced them enough at life drawing. But that's something to bear in mind. Like a lot of this anatomy stuff, I realise it's quite stylized and cartoony in style, but it's all based in reality. And I do a lot of life drawing. Obviously, I need to do more feet, but I do a lot of gesture stuff too, and it all helps to when you come to do an illustration. If you don't have that knowledge, yeah, you can use reference, but to create a pose out of your head, it requires study. So I recommend life drawing. You may notice that I zoom in and out quite a bit, and I like to zoom right out to see the whole image. I do it really quite, I guess, subconsciously. I just zoom in and out, but it quickly lets me see if something's working. Kind of like when you squint your eyes, you can see an image just for its clear black and whites and composition. I find when I zoom out, you lose the details and you just see the overall picture, and it really helps me to see if the image is coming together. I actually spent a fair bit of time trying to get this hand right. Like I mentioned before, that hand and that pencil, they're kind of going to stand out on that page. So they need to look, they need to look quite good, especially the hand. I always find if a hand anatomy looks a bit odd, it kind of annoys me. So I'm not sure I got the hand perfect, but I wanted it to be, a kind of decent looking hand. So I drew over it a couple of times and I did separate it into a different layer and I scaled it and I tweaked it basically until I'm happy with it. I find drawing hair a challenge. I really do. I guess it's something I've not practiced enough of. I think doing this illustration has made me realize I probably should practice a bit more. But if there's something you find you can't draw, then that's what reference is for. Just load up some reference and study it. Don't copy, but reference should be used as, I guess, an inspiration or an idea of how to approach things. So study some reference and it will really help your artwork. Again, I flipped the image to make sure things weren't too wonky. They were a little bit. So I adjust the dog and the girl's face. I hope I tweaked that because it looks a bit odd from this angle. So that flipping the page really helps just to see things afresh. It's like having a fresh view at something. Also, sending work to your art director or your client can really help. They spot things sometimes that you just didn't notice because you've been looking at an image far too long. So at this point, I'm starting to think about bounced light and reflected light. And there's a lot of sunlight hitting this grass, and the grass is probably going to reflect some light back up towards the characters. So I want a bit of a green, a little bit of a glow on the underside of those forms, and maybe a bit of blue in the hair to reflect the sky, and it just kind of brings the colours to life. And I've maybe exaggerated them a little bit, or maybe I've not done them strong enough, but just as a subtle bit of bounced light. I mean, it's important because it's what happens in nature, but it really brings an image to life sometimes. Originally, I'd planned to keep the dog's eyes as those little dark kind of circles, but it just kind of looked odd. Uh, it looked a bit like a kind of creepy zombie dog or something. So I decided to add a bit of white, um, just around the eye, and I think it helped. Kind of made him look more. I don't want to say more human, but more real, kind of more soul in the eyes, if you want. Which is kind of important because in character design and character illustration, the eyes are a really important point of focus. When a viewer looks at an image, they're going to look at the character's eyes and relate to them. So if the eyes are a bit weird, it can really affect how the viewer perceives the image. So although by this point we've still got about another hour of the video to go, I think, um, there's not a lot more to say. I'll keep talking, but I'm basically just doing more of the same. So I'm adding more reflected lights, bounce lights. I'm trying to get the details of the hand right, the face, tweaking this, tweaking that. It's about refining what's already there. So if the process is successful, that strong foundation I talked about sets you up well for later on, and the hard work is done by this point, and it's just a matter of getting those details and polishing what needs polished, and maybe tweaking some things here and there. For example, now I'm trying to get this shadow right, and I'm trying to figure out how this shadow interacts with the background. But the hard work is basically done. You'll notice here maybe that I'm using a drop shadow. So I've created these little kind of weeds, these little clover things in the grass just for a bit more variety. And instead of drawing the shadows in, I just quickly went into the right clicked on the layer and I chose blending options and drop shadow. And you can adjust the color of the shadow, the distance of the shadow, how soft or hard the shadow is. I wouldn't use this for anything, but for the little details like those little kind of weed things or the flowers, it's fine. Because what you can do is you can merge that layer, or you can create a layer from that effect, and then you can edit it yourself. So it was a really quick way of doing a bit of shadow on really small details. One thing you probably won't be aware of from this video is um, I don't I didn't sit down and do it all in one. So this painting process I did over the course of 2 or 3 days, and I broke it into sections. And I find it helps to kind of have a break from the image. So if I spend a couple of hours on it, then go away and do something else for a while, come back to it, my eyes are fresh and I can see things anew. Just like when you flip the image, you see things differently. When you come back to an image after a bit of time away from the computer, it can really help to give a fresh perspective on what you've done. So the sketch in the sketchpad was really kind of bugging me a little bit. I wasn't quite happy with it. So I spent a bit of time redrawing it, trying to get something I was more happy with. I'm still not sure it's, the best kind of design ever. And maybe if I could go back, I'd spend a bit more time on the monster's actual design. But it's important, if something's bugging you about an image, try and sort it. So you probably see me here. I'm tidying up my layers a bit. I'm naming layers. There's too many in there. It's getting annoying. So I start trying to condense the layers into, so merge them down into single layers and stuff, or get rid of the ones I no longer need. So I had some reference sketch layers and just get rid of them. I like to keep things nice and as tidy as possible. Also, at this point, I just received some final feedback from the art director, and they'd asked me to make a couple of tweaks. So they wanted the eyes more pointed up towards that pencil, and they wanted to make the nose a bit less red. So I just had to tone that down a little bit. So that's what I'm doing here, making these final adjustments before going in and doing a final kind of polish over the whole image. It's probably worth saying that, at least in my experience, very few illustration jobs for clients or, unless they're personal work, very few of them will be worked on in a bubble. There's always going to be a back and forward between yourself and the person that's commissioned the artwork, and there'll be critique and there'll be feedback and there'll be direction. So an illustration it's not a one person job in a way. I mean, yeah, fair enough. I've done all the drawing, all the painting, but in a sense, it's a collaboration, at least from the idea point of view. And it's important to take feedback and realize this is a professional job and not take any things personally, especially when a client provides feedback or critique. So I spent a bit of time towards the end of the painting just tightening up these flowers. I thought they looked a bit flat, not very three-dimensional, so I wanted to bring them to life a little bit and kind of sell the space a bit more, and just make them more interesting, to be honest. So I just spent a bit of time doing that. This is the kind of stuff that you get to the end of the end stages of the painting, and you're like, right, what needs kind of seen to, what doesn't quite match the rest of the painting. And for me, those flowers, they were just a bit too rough, a bit too crude. Crude's probably the right word. I spend a bit of time here just adding a bit more grass detail, just with a single brush, nothing complex. Um, just to kind of, just a bit more detail in the background for the eye to kind of focus on. Don't want to be too over the top. As I said before, if I put too much detail in there, it's going to distract from the characters, from the ImagineFX copy. It just has to be enough. Yeah. So I just wanted enough detail. So around the end of the painting, you'll see me here. I've added a color balance adjustment layer, kind of on the top of the whole image. I tweaked around the little dials, and it was at this point I realized the whole image had this kind of green kind of tinge, and the color balance really kind of helped address that. So I I added a bit more red in there, which I think helped balance the colours out. And now here I did one last flip of the image, just to kind of tweak those final things that were bugging me, but from a different perspective again. Especially that dog's face. The dog's face looked a bit strange. So at this point, we're really close to the end. So I'm just adding tiny little tweaks and changes, little details just to kind of finish this off. Nothing major. And I'm looking at the image as a whole in context with the ImagineFX copy to see how it would look as a cover, and making sure everything's just finished. And that's it, done. I hope you enjoyed this workshop. It was quite long, apologies, but if you managed to watch it all, I'm impressed. But I hope you got something out of watching it, and it was useful to you in some way. So thanks again for watching.